Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Free Agent Podcast. I got Ben Baker here. Thanks so much for joining, Ben.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today we're going to talk about communications and really kind of the importance thereof and how to master communications during times of uncertainty. Prior to doing so, just give a quick bio on Ben. So Ben, you're a branding and marketing expert with a focus on internal corporate communications, serving large enterprise clients. You've also got some podcasts as well as you're author of a book, Powerful Personal Brands, a user's guide to understanding yours, which was published 2018 on Amazon, as well as a co-author of Leading Beyond a Crisis, a conversation about what's next, which was published in 2020 on Amazon. You're also a podcast host with over 300 episodes, which I've been on, your Living Brand podcast. Welcome so much to the show. I really appreciate you being here.
Hey, you know what? It's a lot of fun. Thank you for truncating that. I get somebody, some of these hosts that sit there, they go, and Ben does this and Ben does that. And you know what? Nobody cares. I just like short, sweet, to the point. I help people communicate. That's what I do.
I love it. Well, I think this topic is actually, really topical for kind of where we are as a society, as a people. We've gone through it all. Global pandemic, remote work, layoffs, supply chain issues. And now, as far as the U.S. economy is concerned, are we going into recession? Are we not? Nobody seems to know, right? But all these topics have kind of the same underlying theme, which is uncertainty. And uncertainty has really the ability to make people extremely uneasy, and sometimes they make rash decisions. And so one of the reasons I want to have you on today is so we can discuss kind of the communication component within a business, the importance thereof, and how companies can kind of master their own internal communications during these times to alleviate concern with their employees and really continue to thrive. And I think it's something that's, its importance is completely underestimated. But you see people getting laid off all the time who had no clue that it was happening. So anyways, thanks for joining. I think it's super, super important and fun topic for today.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So you ask the questions, I'll do my best to support your audience. How about we do it at that?
No, that sounds great. Well, prior to doing so tell us a little bit about yourself. I gave the little bio, I get the quick bio, but really, who are you? Like, what does your business do? And how'd you get into communications?
Yeah. All right. We'll start off pre-communications. I spent about 10 years in high-tech sales, dealing with $100 million clients and multi-billion-dollar organizations for about 10 years before I got into communications. Long and short of it is I was George Clooney. I was up in the air 200 plus days a year.
Oh, man.
Wife and I in 1997 took a look at each other and said, this is a divorce waiting to happen.
Sure.
And, and I made the great shift from sales to marketing because I figured, okay, I'll be home more. And, got into direct mail, got into promotional marketing, trade show development, brands, social media over the years. And it was all to do tell their story more effectively. Mm-hmm. That's been the underlying theme is how do we tell stories more effectively? How do we differentiate you in the marketplace?
Right.
And about 10 years ago, I came to the realization this is okay. There's a lot of people out there trying to help people tell their story to their audience externally. Very few people telling their story internally. Mm-hmm. And if your own people don't understand who you are, what you do, why you do it, who you do it for, and why they should care, those people won't, and neither will the people inside your company. So that's where I've dedicated myself, is to internal communication, helping the left hand speak to the right hand, trying to break down processes, destroy those silos and be able to make organizations more effective and more profitable.
Got it. No, that makes total sense. And I love the reference to storytelling, which is a component of communication. In fact, we've done a podcast about that, and maybe we should kind of, think about doing that in the future. But storytelling to me is such a critical component to just how you communicate, be it from a sales perspective, marketing perspective, or internally. It's just it's really interesting you brought that up. Well, let's talk a little bit about communication. Yeah. Sorry, you there? We have
no. I was thinking about the storytelling. The reason you tell stories is because that's how you plant it in people's brains. When you can give them a story, and it doesn't matter if you're a $1 trillion company or a company that does $1 million a year, people understand where you came from, where you are, what you do, why you do it, and where you're going, and be able to tell that story. First of all, understand that story, dig it deep, and be able to recall it and retell it. That's powerful, both from internal decision-making point of view and also from customer alignment point of view.
Agreed. And I think that's a good way and a good segue into communication in general. And so why is it such an integral part to a successful business? I feel like, especially maybe in the SMB space, it's often overlooked. And you may have kind of the founder of a company, say they're $15-20 million. They know what's going on. They know what's happening. Profits are down, revenues are down, and they're going to make layoffs, but nobody else within the organization does. And candidly, a lot of those folks may think, well, this is my business. It's not really theirs. But that kind of lack of transparency can really add to fear, add to chaos, add to, attrition. So why is it so important that these leaders, these founders actually communicate with their people and they know what's going on within the business?
Well, I think you nailed it with that is fear and attrition and change. People are scared of change. Everybody's scared of change. One of my key notes that I tell around the world is telling the story of change. And we deal with change every single day, whether it's a new product development, whether it's, new people within the company, whether it's a new system or process. It doesn't have to be a big change, but we need to be able to sit there and say, okay, not only what the change is,
right,
but why are we doing it? And as leaders, if we can explain to people why we're doing something, not just that we are doing it, but why we're doing it, how it affects them, and how it will make their life better, you're going to get far better alignment, and you're going to make people far less stressed. They're going to, there's a lot less speculation that goes on in the company. There's a lot less disengagement in the company, and far fewer people running for the hills because they think that their job is in jeopardy when it's probably not. Right. We think we communicate well. We all think we communicate well, but yes, we don't.
Yeah, no, it's funny. The old water cooler talk, is probably the worst thing that ever happened to business, where people, maybe they hear something, maybe they misinterpret something, but then all of a sudden, they're telling somebody else who then tell somebody else. If you remember the elementary school exercise, that's no bueno. And to me, that kind of ties back to the importance of communication, because if it came from the top, then you wouldn't have those rumblings at the lower level and people running for the hills when maybe it's a, false start.
Yeah. So, I take a look at leaders, and it doesn't matter if you're a $5 million company or a $500 million company, to sit there and say, okay, what are the critical things your people need to know? Do they? And, with larger companies, there's processes and things that you need to do because there's so many people that you need to deal with, and, right, cross boundaries, cross languages, etc. But in smaller companies, having a CEO or an owner, whatever, actually going down and say, so what do you think about this? Mm-hmm. And, shutting their mouth, listening. And do people within the company perceive things the same way you do? And actually having those conversations, not giving your opinion, not letting people know what your agenda is, but say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And if we can do that type of thing, you're going to get a lot of insights about what people actually believe. And they may believe the exact same thing you do, or they may think of something completely different. And either way, you're going to have better information to be able to make decisions moving forward.
So let's explore this a little further. My next question was really around kind of small businesses and how could they be more effective at communication. But maybe there's a blueprint here. I mean, I understand completely what you're saying about a CEO, being more open, being more interested in what's going on with its employees. But is there some sort of maybe cadence that they should employ where, hey, I'm going to go walk around the shop floor once a month, or, host a quarterly discussion with my executive team just to kind of get to know them and kind of them personally better? Is there kind of some blueprint for success that these companies can employ?
The answer is yes. I mean, the answer is yes. Every organization is different. Are you a 5-person company or a 200-person company? How structured is your board of directors? How often does your board of directors meet? How does your board of directors meet? How often does your, junior leadership team meet with their teams? How often are you as an owner meeting with the management level to get their opinion? So therefore, when they're having conversations with the people that are actually, doing the actual work, that they can have those conversations. So it's really sitting there going, says, what is our culture as an organization? How do we connect? And when you're dealing with work from home, when you're dealing with, hybrid workforce, you're dealing with all sorts of things, it really depends, but the best thing is more communication is better, but it's having effective communication. Just, having 8 Zoom meetings a day is
Right.
exhausting.
No, it's terrible.
Does it need to be a Zoom meeting? No. Can it be a memo? Yes. How do you make sure that you're gaining information, not giving information, but you're gaining information back? And that's the process you need to be always thinking about. How am I getting, information back from the field that lets me know that people either understand or don't understand what's expected of them?
So essentially creating like feedback loop of sorts where, you kind of disseminate some information to your team, let them digest it, and then kind of give them an opportunity to reshare what they heard back with you for some insights.
Exactly. The more you can get people to share, the better. But here's the trick. You need to be able to do something with that information you share. It says, as a lawyer always says, never ask a question that you don't want the answer to.
Fair enough.
If all of a sudden, you're not prepared to spend $50 million on a brand new piece of equipment, and everybody in your organization says you need to, there's a problem. And you need to have an answer as to why we're not spending that $50 million.
Sure.
Or $50,000 or $5,000. It doesn't really matter the size of a piece of equipment, but you need to be able to say, hey, listen, I hear you all, I understand, but because of this, this, and this, we're going to have to hold that off for 2 quarters. When we get to this level, or once this, and this happens, then we'll be able to do that. But you need to be able to respond to people's responses and be able to get them know that they've been listened to, they've been understood, and they've been valued.
Makes sense. So something I teed up at the start of this call was around uncertainty and communication. And so, I would imagine the answer is yes, it's extremely important during those times, but let's talk a little bit about that. So, leaders communicating inside their enterprises during times of uncertainty, economic downturns, global pandemics. What are some best practices that maybe people can arm themselves? Because obviously we went through COVID. We're still kind of in COVID, whatever you want to call it, but I'm sure something else is coming down the pike in the next 1, 3, 5 years. Right. So what can these organizations do during those times? Because there's also a line, right? You don't want to be too transparent sometimes, but people, but saying nothing is way too little.
Yeah. Opening up the kimono all the way, scares people.
Yeah.
Nobody wants me to open up my kimono all the way. We're going to scare people that way, but you need to be transparent to a level where people can sit there and go, okay, I've got the information that I need to be able to do my job on a daily basis. And when we're dealing through crisis, the more information you can give, the better. Here's a perfect example. David McCain from McCain Foods, they had an E. coli outbreak years ago. People died. I think 6 or 7 people died. He stood in front of the media for 30 days straight, letting people know what happened, what is happening, and what's going to happen. Answered every single question the media had, and in turn was giving that information to his people. To be able to sit there and say, hey, listen, I'm head of the company. This is a crisis. Let me let you know what's happening. Because if you try to do it and say, hey, listen, we're not going to tell anybody what's going on, we're not going to let anything, let any information out, people get scared. When people don't have information,
Sure.
People make up answers on their own, and people's answers and their what ifs are usually far scarier than what the truth truly is.
Mm-hmm.
And people can handle the truth. What they can't handle is being lied to. What they can't handle is being managed. And when people feel managed, or they feel lied to, or they feel that they're left out of the loop and they're left to fend for themselves, they go running for the hills.
That's a great point. The worst fear here would be, all the assumptions that the employees are making, right? And I totally agree. 9 out of 10 times those assumptions are going to be incorrect and way far, worst case scenario as opposed to what the actual reality may be. And so what about in this situation where maybe the leader actually doesn't know what's going to happen, right? Completely uncertain during COVID. Hey, are we going to lay you off? I don't know. I can't tell you whether or not that's going to happen. Is that kind of a good way to communicate, or is it best practice to really kind of wait until you have more of a definitive answer? Because to me, vulnerability is important and honesty. and transparency. And to me, I feel like that would be important, even if you didn't know what the answer was definitively. But I'd love for you to kind of weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'll take it down to a very personal experience. 10, 15 days into the pandemic, when everything was hitting the fan in March 2020, I get a phone call from one of the people I mentor. And he goes, Ben, it says, do you have some time right now? I said, yeah. He says, I don't know how much time I need. I said, okay, fine. I'll block everything off. Let's have a conversation. I said, what's up? He says, I think I'm going to have to let go my entire workforce.
Wow.
He's got a team of 10. He thought, he had no idea how long this was going to go. He was in the promotional marketing industry, fairly healthy business, $2-3 million promotional marketing business with some very substantial clients, but he had no idea how his clients were going to retract,
right?
How business was going to retract, how his suppliers were going to. He's sitting there going, he was like everybody else. We're just sitting there with our hands in the air going, we don't know what's next. And he says, how do I deal with this? How do I make sure that my people know that I'm not abandoning them? But on the other hand, I need to find ways that I can take care of them while still, figuring out ways to make sure that the company survives. So it's here when they come back. And I said, you know what? You need to bring your people in for a meeting. You need to have a conversation with them, and you need to be open and honest and say, hey, listen, let's come up, we're a small enough organization. Let's figure this out together. And what they ended up doing is, for a month or a month and a half, used up whatever vacation that they had. And people went back and they worked, part-time for a month or two to be able to, at least pay their bills.
Sure.
And be able to, the good news is the government of Canada stepped up, and there was employee salary, help there. So he was able to be able to fulfill half their salaries from the government. But his thought process is, how do I take care of my people? How do I make sure, because they've got mortgages, they've got kids, they've got health insurance needs, they've got all these different things. How do I take care of them, but also make sure that this company is good to be able to, take care of them in the long term? And it came down to not only his views, but listening to the views of his people,
right? And
going, let's figure this out together. And that was probably one of the most mature thought processes I heard during the whole COVID thing, where it wasn't reactionary. It was, here's what reality is. Here we've got 6 months or 9 months worth of runway in the bank. We know that we can survive this long, but beyond that, we have no idea. How can we work together to be able to extend that and to be able to make sure that everybody's taken care of to a point where they're able to be successful? And I think that there's no one answer. I think a lot of it comes down to laying out the groundwork, laying out what reality is,
right? And
saying, okay, as a team, how do we fix this together?
So I think that's a phenomenal story, and really kind of underscores the importance of communication, because I'm willing to bet that, had he have not come to his team and shared precisely where they were, and was honest and vulnerable, then they would have probably looked for jobs. But he actually gave visibility into the issue, let them know, hey, I don't have all the answers. We're in a global pandemic. Who knows what's going to happen? But they were able to come together because, again, he showed leadership. It was able to communicate effectively about where the company stood. So I think that's a great story. I appreciate you sharing that.
And let me add one more story, is that there's also companies out there that over a 2-minute Zoom call fired 400 to 800 people at a time.
Yes.
And no camera on. Some secretary read some prepared statement by a lawyer. And at the end of the statement, everybody who is on this call is fired. And that was it. That was the conversation. And because it was in the States and it was an at-will, state, those people are gone. That made the social media like wildfire. And that company, and I'm not, people can look it up themselves and find out who that company is, but I'll never do business with them again.
Yeah. So another company did that as well, in the Southeast, a big company. I think it was 1,300 employees. And I had a conversation with several of them that were on like an awards trip prior, a week prior. to that had no idea, zero idea, and then got on kind of the cattle call and they're laid off. I don't know what their severance was, doesn't matter. But they're gone. And as far as they knew, the internal communication was everything's great, we're crushing it, investors are happy, and then just boom, pulled the rug right out from underneath them. Their brand got tarnished, and they had a lot of unhappy people that otherwise could have been a little happier should they have been let go in a much different manner. So it's super important. It's crazy that companies really at this day and age still underestimate how important it is to communicate effectively and let people know where they stand.
The word was their brand reputation, because it's not just the employees that are being affected.
Yeah.
Customers all of a sudden start running from the hills as well, because they go, okay, are these people going to be around? Are there going to be people here that take care of me? Wait a second, they just fired my favorite sales rep. He's moved over, or she's moved over to another company. I'm going with them.
Sure. And not to go on a
I don't know this
path.
company's loyalty.
Yeah, not to go on a tangential path, but it's also perspective, like future employees as well. They've tarnished their brand, and now they're going to have a much harder time attracting people because they saw what happened to those that were before them.
Yeah.
Right?
Glassdoor is your best friend and your worst enemy.
Exactly. So two more questions here, and then we'll get you out of here, Ben. I appreciate you taking the time.
Sure.
So I'm sure you've heard of like radical candor, and I think this is a good follow up to the question a few moments ago. That's out of Silicon Valley, which I think it's a somewhat of a crazy concept. But is there a possibility of going too far with kind of your communication and your transparency, where you end up actually causing chaos, even though kind of your whole goal was to be transparent and keep everybody calm, because you're sharing where things stood? And how can small companies kind of maybe figure out what's too far and how to effectively bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's funny because you're the third person in the last week and a half that has referenced radical candor. I mean, it's a great book. For people who have not read it, read it. It is interesting because if you take a look at it and sit there and say, okay, how much is too much? I'm a big believer that under communicating is far more damaging than over communicating. You can always dial back. You can always clarify. You can always be able to bring more information to bear, that be able to I hate to use the word spin it, but to bring things back to a position of normalcy, for lack of a better word. But when you under communicate, that's when rumors fly. That's when people get nervous. That's which people get to a point where they're going to speculate within their own heads, and far more worse things happen when you under communicate than when you over communicate. And there are people that disagree with me, and that's okay. But that's my point of view. My point of view is I would, from a leader's point of view, I would much rather hear somebody over communicate and have them dial something back,
sure,
and clarify, than under communicate and leave me to speculate.
I completely agree. So there's at least one person in your camp, right? And I employ that in my own business, where I'm an over communicator, and that's my style. And I've found that really kind of establishes a level of trust with my clients than perhaps any other style. And so that's a great point. That, I mean, of course, there's too much information, but to your point, there is a level, and if you're below it, that's not good.
Yeah,
so totally agreed.
My clients don't need to know about my daughters, and I don't have a daughter, but they don't need to know about my daughter's gynecological exams. I mean, that's TMI. But when it comes to the business, I'm not sure you can over communicate.
Sure. No, I love that. So last question for you. What's one thing that a mid-sized organization can do tomorrow that will change kind of their internal communication landscape?
I think, first of all, have one. I think you need to build the policies and procedures and people to be able to communicate more effectively. Unfortunately, we all think that we're great communicators. We're not. We all think that we tell stories well. Most of us don't. Most of us audience and figure that it's been understood. We all need to build mechanisms that listen and be able to be understood before we need to understand before we are understood. So the more we can sit there and say, okay, it's not about me, it's about us. And how do I get our opinions, not just my opinions?
Interesting point. I totally agree with you. So it kind of starts with the plan and the blueprint. And as you were thinking, like most companies, they have a newsletter, and the newsletter goes external, right? It's just for external communication, for customers, for prospects, for whomever wants to stay abreast of what's going on with your company. But as you're talking, and I know companies do this, but I was thinking, how important an internal newsletter could be, right? Be it once a month, be it once a quarter, but an opportunity for the CEO or whoever runs a company to really kind of connect with the employees and let them know what's going on at a pretty basic level.
Let me tell you a newsletter story. And this is where a newsletter can be good and where it can be bad.
Okay.
I walked into a company pre-COVID, about a year and a half before COVID. And we're at the mothership. There's about 400 or 500 people that work at head office. And I get led into this beautiful cafeteria type thing. And there's this gorgeous 3-layer fondue cake that somebody's created. It's obviously hand-created cake. And I went into the meeting. I said, so what's the story with this? I says, oh, one of our vice presidents creates cakes. That's one of her passions. She says she makes a cake every single month for the employees of the head office. And we have a birthday party once a month for everybody whose birthday is during that month. I said, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I said, what about the other 32 offices you have around the world? And they said, well, she can't make cakes. I go, yeah, okay, she can't make cakes. I go, but in your newsletter every single month, there's a picture of this cake.
Ah, wow. Yes.
And all of a sudden you have 32 offices that are saying, where's my cake?
Right.
Who's recognizing my birthday?
Yeah.
How come head office is more important than we are? And for the cost that it would be to have a local contract with a local baker in those 32 locations, to be able to say, okay, this office has got 12 employees, maybe 4 months a year.
Yeah.
We have to have cakes. The cost of it is insignificant,
right,
versus so we need to be very careful when we create newsletters that we're not creating an us versus them mentality inadvertently, because there's things that happen at head office that are not being shared, or not being, opportunities that are not being provided to people that work in the field.
That's a great story. It also kind of underscores the importance of being, clear, but also too conscientious, and ensuring that there's equity across, all your different, offices. I could completely see, your perspective on how these 32 offices feel alienated because they're just having fun at headquarters, and they're getting a much better kind of employee experience, if you will.
Exactly. And it leads to a point that says, oh, well, I live in the hinterlands. My contribution is nowhere near as important as the people that work at head office.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. I think it's a great story to end on, Ben. I appreciate you taking the time. So where can people find you?
You know what? The best way for people to find me is at yourbrandmarketing.com. That's the mother lode. That's where you can get to my podcast. That's where you can get to all my free ebooks. You can get to my consulting page. For small organizations, we come in on a just to see where you are and give you some hints of where to go, and help you along the way. For large organizations, we obviously do a much deeper dive and create internal podcasts that are, designed for companies that are 5,000 to 100,000 employees. So, come to the site, have a look around. There's lots of free material, lots of ebooks for you to read. And if I can be of service, and let's have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, hey, Ben, great insight. Really appreciate you coming on. Thanks again.
Bo, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.